If the Sacramento Kings are going to become a true contender in the NBA, it's all hands on deck. Every player has a significant role to play. But when it comes to Kevin Huerter's role, I think we might all be underestimating a little bit how important he is to that next big step for Sacramento. We'll discuss right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all offseason long. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports reporter and producer for ABC 10 News. We are all hoping that this season the Sacramento Kings can make another big step in the right direction. The Kings are hoping to open what Monte McNair is calling a championship window. And Kings head coach Mike Brown has been very open and honest about the fact that it is much more difficult for a team to go from good to great than it is to go from bad to good, which is what Sacramento did last season. I don't think there are, I should say, I think the vast majority of Sacramento Kings fandom, and maybe even many in the Kings organization, are not necessarily expecting the Kings to be a true contending team this season. I think they believe they're well on the way to that. I think their moves suggest in bringing guys back and extending Domantas Sabonis, the fact that all 5 of their starters are under contract for at least the next 3 years. The belief is this team now can develop and become a true contender, but maybe they're still a step or 2 or 3 away from becoming that. But whether it's this season or in future seasons, if the Kings are going to become a contender, everybody has to step up in a different way. Top to bottom on this roster, especially with the primary guys, there are significant roles that need to be filled and things that need to happen for the Kings to become a true contending team. And I'm not just about talking about a team that's capable of making a deep playoff run. I'm talking about a team that's expected to be in that NBA Finals or Western Conference Finals picture for at least a handful of years. A team that might not be unbeatable, might not be the greatest team that anybody has ever seen or that has ever been assembled, but a team that, if they get to that stage, can perform on that stage, and it is reasonable to believe that that team is capable of being the best team in the NBA that season and bringing home a title, bringing home a championship. So when it comes to the roles of like De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis, or even like we've discussed, like Keegan Murray developing into the third leading scorer for the Kings and that second true go-to scorer to create their own shot. Like, those roles are pretty clear. Those roles are pretty obvious. And you would think that Kevin Huerter's role in all this, or maybe the more appropriate word is Kevin Huerter's fit in all of this, would be pretty obvious and pretty apparent. But over the course of the season, the first season that Kevin had here in Sacramento, the success that he had early and the struggles that he had over the course of the year, how poorly he played during the NBA playoffs, to quite frankly put it lightly, I think all of that has led to many of us just kind of accepting who Kevin Huerter is, or just accepting that, oh, sure, he's a good fit for the Sacramento Kings. He makes sense for the Kings on their roster, but maybe he's glossed over a little bit, or maybe he's just not necessarily focused on as much as he should be when it comes to the significance that he has, the impact that he can have in the Kings becoming a contender. I was thinking about this. I was having a conversation with my friends Damian Barling and Kenny Caraway, D'Lo and KC, on their radio show this week. And we were talking about who is the third most important player on the Sacramento Kings. And this is up for debate. There are a lot of players that you could discuss there. Both Kenny and I feel like it's Malik Monk. And if you want to weigh in on that, I'm not going to talk about that on this podcast. If you want to discuss that in a future podcast, we can. But I feel at this point it's Malik Monk, and I think it's going to be Keegan Murray by the time next season is said and done. If you want to weigh in on that, you can. If you're watching on YouTube, hit me up on YouTube at Matt George Sack, or rather, excuse me, hit me up in the comment section down below, and then you can hit me up on Twitter or X, as it's called. Not screw it. I'm calling it Twitter, at Matt George Sack. You can hit me up there. You can also email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com. And by the way, quick pause. Audio listeners, this is not going to make any sense to you, but video watchers, you can see in my On Today's Show column there that way to my, I can't even point to it. Why can I not figure this out? This is why I would never be a weatherman. Over there, it says on today's show that I'm going to talk about Oakland A's ownership being bad for all of sports. You might be a little confused about that. Stick around to the end of the show. I have a pretty big rant for you about Oakland A's ownership and why I think it's bad for all of professional sports. And it's a random topic, but it's coming. So don't be alarmed and think that that's a typo. No, I'm actually talking about that. But anyway, we were discussing on D-Lo and KC about whether or not, or like who's the third best player on the Sacramento Kings. And Kevin Huerter is not mentioned. Kevin Huerter is not brought up, even though technically Kevin Huerter was the third leading scorer on the Sacramento Kings last season, averaging 15.2 points per game for Sacramento. So no, scoring doesn't always translate to being the best player. There's more to basketball than just scoring, but Kevin Huerter wasn't really considered. And while I do agree that Kevin Huerter is not the third best player on this team, there are nights where he will be. There are nights where he could be the second best player on the Kings. There's a lot of guys on this roster that can have nights where they're the second or third or fourth best player. I think pretty typically the best player on the Kings roster every single night is going to be either De'Aaron Fox or Domantas Sabonis, but Kevin might have his nights. Keegan will certainly have his nights. Malik will have his nights. Harrison Barnes could have his nights. So that's what's good about the deep talent that's on this roster. But ultimately, I don't think many of us consider Kevin Huerter to be a true top player on this Kings team. But don't let that undermine or cause you to not appreciate or recognize how crucial Kevin is to the success of the Sacramento Kings. He was essential to the success of the team last year, establishing one of the best offenses in NBA history. One of the major reasons why, of course, the Kings scored like 120 points per game, 120.7 points per game, which led the league. Like, Kevin Huerter was essential to the success of the Kings last season, of course. And as this team continues to develop, the offense either stays the same or even gets a little bit better. The defense hopefully improves, and the Kings truly try to establish themselves as true contenders. Kevin's role in that, simply because of his presence, cannot be understated. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And I have a lot of numbers to go through here, because I was just going through some stats and looking at some stats, and it's pretty crazy how important Kevin has been for the Kings. Let's talk about the two things that Kevin does that are irreplaceable for Sacramento. You can maybe find other players that could also do this, but these are two things that the Kings can simply not operate without. It's spacing and shooting. Specifically, he opens up the paint for De'Aaron Fox, for Domantas Sabonis, and for Kings cutters. It is essential for a team to have at least two shooters, and that's Kevin Huerter and Keegan Murray essentially in this offense, at least with that starting lineup. Those guys that can stand in the corners or stand on the wings, stand at the top of the key, draw defenders out, open up that painted area a little bit for guys like Fox to thrive, where of course he does in the lane with that mid-range jumper. Domantas Sabonis in the high post, which the Kings run all their offense through him, off-ball cutters and things like that. Like, that is all made possible because the presence of Kevin Huerter on the floor. That's number one. Number two is Kevin naturally takes pressure off of the shoulders of Fox and Sabonis and the other key members of the Sacramento Kings. Him naturally being out there, him being a constant threat on the perimeter, means that De'Aaron will either take advantage of defenders leaving him in order to try and help on Fox or help on Sabonis. Those guys can take advantage of that by having a trusted and consistent three-point shooter out there on the perimeter that will make opposing defenses pay when they leave him open from three-point range. And I have numbers to share with you in a second to reflect that. Or that defender will choose not to leave Kevin Huerter because they know how good he is and how capable he is of hitting that outside shot, of hitting an open shot, of getting hot at any given time, and they force their teammate to handle De'Aaron Fox one-on-one or force somebody else to help, and a defense breaks down or Fox dominates a 1v1 matchup like we've seen him do, not just all last season, but basically his entire career. Kevin Huerter being out there provides natural spacing for the rest of the team, which is essential to the Kings offense, and he takes pressure off of the top two guys of Fox and Sabonis by forcing defenses to respect him. Next season, again, the Kings offense was one of the best we've ever seen, averaging 120.7 points per game. Because of Keegan Murray and Kevin Huerter, I think the Kings have a very good chance of even improving upon that. It doesn't always have to be points per game scored, but the efficiency of the Sacramento Kings offense can continue to improve based off of the efficiency and consistency of the shooting and scoring of both Huerter and Murray and the spacing that they provide. The Kings were 8th in three-pointers made last season at 12.1. For perspective, the Milwaukee Bucks were 1st in the league with 15.6 made three-pointers per game. The Milwaukee Bucks have put together a very, very simple offensive scheme, which is Giannis attacks the basket and draws in a crowd. You surround him with 4 shooters who are capable of knocking down shots. Now, the Kings will always have 4 shooters out there with De'Aaron. If Domantas Sabonis could turn into a more consistent shooter, maybe that could help. But the way the Kings run is very different from how the Milwaukee Bucks run, but the concept is still relatively the same, right? So offensively, Sacramento is capable of raising that made threes in a game from 12.1 to 15.6. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if that made threes number goes up to 13 or 14 per game this season with the amount of weapons that the Sacramento Kings have, and the fact that the more respect that De'Aaron Fox gains, the more respect that Domantas Sabonis gains, the more opportunity that the shooters are going to have from the perimeter. The Kings were also 3rd in the NBA in three-pointers attempted at 39.7. Again, I could see that number going up as well. Specifically with Kevin Huerter, I thought this number was interesting because you would think, okay, for Kevin Huerter to be better for the Sacramento Kings, what if he scores more, right? Like I mentioned, he was the 3rd leading scorer on the Kings last season, averaging 15.2 points per game. So if Kevin Huerter is going to play more of an important role, Matt, in the Kings becoming contenders, does that mean the Kings are going to need him to score more? Can he become a 16 or 17 points per game shooter or a scorer? I thought this was interesting. Kevin is more than capable of getting into the 20s and scoring. And typically when he does that, the Kings are in good shape. However, this number surprised me a little bit. Huerter had 17 games last season where he scored 20 or more points. In those 17 games, the Kings went only 9-8. So what does that tell you? That doesn't necessarily mean that Kevin Huerter scoring more is going to always be a great thing for the Sacramento Kings. Kevin Huerter's impact in the Kings becoming contenders doesn't just fall with him scoring more baskets and scoring more points and hitting more shots. It goes deeper than that. When Kevin had 21 games with 4 or more made three-pointers. Now, this is where it gets interesting. 21 games of 4 or more made three-pointers. In those 21 games, the Kings went 13-8. His shooting specifically, his floor spacing specifically, is what unlocks that next level to his game. He had 15 games of 5 or more assists. I thought Kevin Huerter's passing was something that surprised me a little bit. I thought that and his mid-range game were underrated last season. I still think they're underrated, something that he does pretty well. In those 15 games with 5+ assists, the Kings went 10-5. So to me, the next step of Kevin Huerter's game is continuing to hit that outside shot. Of course, that's pretty easy, but becoming someone who continues to react well to how defenses handle Fox, how defenses handle Sabonis, and to speak to the relationship on the floor that he has with Sabonis and Fox, how much he benefits from playing with the two of them, of course, but also how much the two of them benefit from playing with him. He had 183 he had 205 made three-pointers for the Kings last season. That's a pretty good number. 205 made threes that were assisted. 183 of his 205 assisted made threes were from Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox. 149 of them from Sabonis. That's a lot of the dribble handoff game. 66 of them from De'Aaron Fox. If that doesn't speak to how well Huerter reacts and feeds off of Fox and Sabonis, and how the two of them can benefit playing in their offense, playing in their style, from having a perimeter poacher like Huerter on the floor at all times, I don't know what does. Huerter benefits from the two of them more than anybody else on the floor, but that goes two ways, right? The two of those guys, Fox and Sabonis, also take advantage of Kevin Huerter's ability on the perimeter, because whether it's defenses collapsing, let's say it's Fox, a defense is collapsing on De'Aaron Fox. If it's Kevin Huerter's man leaving him, he has a wide open option on the perimeter. If it's not Kevin Huerter's man leaving him, but the defense is still collapsing, Fox knows he has a reliable option in Huerter on the perimeter that he can always kick out to. And typically, Huerter is going to make the right play, whether it's putting the ball up or putting the ball up or putting the ball on the floor. In terms of like the amount of wide open looks that Kevin Huerter had, he shot 42% on 3-pointers that were wide open, which means no defender within 6 feet of him. The fact that he can get that much space is pretty incredible with how good of a shooter he is. For context, he shot 38% on shots that were considered open, which is a defender between 3 and 6 feet, or I think it's 4 and 6 feet. And then he shot 35% on 3-pointers where he was defended tight, which is, I think, 1 to 3 feet. So Kevin Huerter clearly benefits, of course, from how much he spaces the floor. I've got more numbers to share with you about the fatigue factor in Kevin Huerter's game. And this is where I think his real next step is going to come from, the consistency and ability to handle the role that he's been assigned and be able to play that over the course of the year without having his numbers drop off and then the fatigue factor really work itself in as much as it did last year. I think that was kind of his growing pain. That was kind of his figuring out the Kings offense. We're going to talk about the fatigue factor coming up here in just a second after I tell you about a great sponsor here of the Locked On Kings podcast. I've talked about them many times before. FanDuel, if you're looking to take your first swing at betting the MLB, do it at FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, whether you win or you lose. That's $200 that you can spend on betting anything from the money line to the over or under, or to who you think is going to hit the first home run of the game. It's all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. So how does fatigue play a factor in Kevin Huerter's game, and how does it play a factor in his role for the Kings becoming a contending team going forward? Well, his shooting from 3-point range specifically, which is the most valuable skill that he brings to the table, not his only skill, but the most valuable skill that he brings to the Kings, that was impacted heavily based off of the amount of playing time that he had. And as time went on over the course of last season, we saw those numbers dip. He shot 53% from 3-point range in the month of October. Now, the season starts mid to late October, so that's not a massive sample size. Remember, he came out shooting just lights out from 3-point range. So a 53% 3-point shooting rate, that's not going to be consistent. We know that, but still, it got off to an incredibly hot start. 53% in October. That dipped down to 41% in the month of November. Still over 40% from 3-point range. That's good. You will take that month from a high volume 3-point shooter. In December and January, those percentages dropped down to 37%. Not as good, but not horrible, especially again for a high volume 3-point shooter, but you would like to see that number up in the 39, 40, 41% range. Then we get to February, which was a really big of a struggle month for him. 29% from 3-point range in the month of February. In March, after the All-Star break and the rest that he got during that All-Star break, he skyrocketed back up to 51% from 3-point range. Just had a red hot month of March after getting that little break. In April, he plummeted back down to 25%. The fatigue catches up quicker in the second half of the season. 1 week off is not enough time, of course. And then in the playoffs, Kevin Huerter shot 20% from 3-point range. Those numbers are a clear reflection of the fatigue that he suffered over the course of the season. To start out as hot as he did and to trickle off, then have a really bad month, finally get his break, have a great month after that break, fresh legs, and then to again trickle off, and then plummet to that 25% in April, and the amount that he struggled in April and in the playoffs. Like that, to me, that's where you unlock the next level of Kevin Huerter, which helps the Kings get to that next level of becoming a contender. If you can get a consistent 40 to 43, 43 is a lot. If you can get a consistent 38 to 41% 3-point shooting every single month from Kevin Huerter throughout the course of the entire year, and of course in the playoffs too, the Kings are a monumentally better team. Even if he ends up averaging that 41% from 3-point range, he has the same exact 3-point average for the season that he did last year. If it's more consistent over the course of the year versus having these extremely hot months followed by these extremely cold months, that consistency means the Sacramento Kings are a better basketball team. That consistency means he's even more reliable than he already is. But what played into this fatigue? Like, why or where did this fatigue come from Kevin Huerter? And is it something that we've seen before in his career? Well, in his time with his last season with the Atlanta Hawks versus this past season with the Kings, his usage rate went up by 3 points. His pace and minutes, though, basically stayed the same. So he was playing an equal amount of minutes, or relatively similar amount of minutes in Sacramento last season than he was the season before in Atlanta. And those two teams were playing at the same speed. So it wasn't the minutes that he was playing and the pace that he was playing at that was leading to that fatigue. It was the fact that he was being used more, taking more shots, the Kings were relying on him more, going to him more, playing through him more. He was getting a higher volume of shots than he got in his time in Atlanta. He had a bigger role in Sacramento, which we knew he was going to have coming into the season, and we didn't know how well he was going to be able to handle that. All things considered, I think he handled it pretty well, and you can see where there's areas of improvement that he can make. Like it would be a bad thing, or it would be concerning if the Kings were to come into this season and you'd look back on the year he had last year and go, man, I can't really see ways that he can improve off of that, because the Kings as a whole need to continue to improve. If they get the same version of Kevin Huerter next year that they got this past season, this past year, then they're not in bad shape. But I think they need a consistent, less tired. That's easy to say from someone sitting in a chair talking about the game versus actually playing it. But if they can get that consistent Kevin Huerter impact from 3-point range that's not as affected by fatigue, and he's able to kind of manage the ebbs and flows as a shooter over the course of the entire regular season and going into the playoffs, I think that's a big step for him. His offensive rating was up 5 points, 116 to 121, which is great. He was more efficient as an offensive player, more efficient as a scorer for the Sacramento Kings from his time with the Atlanta Hawks. And what's not encouraging is that his defensive rating went up 112 to 116. Now, you have to understand, with defensive rating, the higher the defensive rating, the worse that it is. You want low defensive rating, and offensive rating, you want a high offensive rating. So think more points is good on offense, less points is good on defense. So his defensive rating did go up. The Kings could always ask for more from him and the rest of this team defensively. But what was good is that he had the best net rating of his career, which was 4.5. He was a positive 4.5 net rating, the best of his career, which was up from a 3.8 net rating this past season, or rather the season before, with the Atlanta Hawks. Kevin Huerter is more than capable of handling this role as more of a volume scorer for the Sacramento Kings. Again, the consistency of Huerter and the ability to manage the fatigue of the season and not allow that to have drastic impact on his production and cause inconsistency the way that it affected him last season. I think that is absolutely the key, or step one, to the positive impact that Kevin Huerter is more than capable of making for the Sacramento Kings and turning them into contenders. So what are your thoughts? I mean, I threw a lot of numbers at you there. What do you take away from those numbers? What are your thoughts on Kevin Huerter and his role as a important and valued piece on a potential championship team. We might not have all the answers to that. He might be one of those players that once the Kings become that championship contender, truly, that they need to upgrade to get that little extra push, right, to actually win a title. He could be the guy that's replaced in that scenario, or it could be Harrison Barnes. It could be somebody else. We don't know. But based off of the numbers and based off what I know of Kevin Huerter, the player, and specifically what I know of Kevin Huerter's fit and how I can see numerically the Kings stars benefit from playing with him, I believe a more consistent Kevin Huerter is what this Sacramento Kings team needs, or one of the many things, but a crucial piece of this team becoming a real championship contender.
If you're wondering what it's like podcasting with a toddler, this is what you get. Recording a segment in your car because your voice is going to get too loud and you're going to get a little too fired up, and you don't want to wake the young man up, and then he ruins your entire night. So here I am sitting in my car, and it's hot, but I'm getting through this. Why am I recording in my car? Because I'm doing something a little bit differently here. I'm talking about something that has nothing to do with Sacramento Kings basketball. I'm talking about A's baseball here. Now, you're probably wondering why. If you don't know, I'm a diehard A's fan. I've been a diehard A's fan basically my entire life, even though there are times, frequently, recently, that I wish that I wasn't, and wish that I could just put the team aside and stop caring about them. But alas, I cannot do that because of how ingrained the A's are into my life and into my fandom. Now, I know there are a lot of fans in Sacramento that are A's fans. I also am aware that the majority of baseball fans in the Sacramento area are probably San Francisco Giants fans. So if you're that, I'm telling you, do not turn off this segment and don't just tune out just because it's about the A's and it's not about your team. And even those of you who are not baseball fans, period, I encourage you to continue to listen, because what's happening in Oakland, specifically with Oakland A's ownership, is an issue for all of professional sports, not just for the Oakland A's and not just for Major League Baseball. I'm aware that sports are a business. I'm not naive, right? There's so much cash flow that goes through professional sports. The amount of money that players make, that comes from somewhere, right? That comes from lucrative TV deals. That comes from advertising sponsors. That comes from ticket sales. That comes from selling merchandise. There's so much money that goes in and out of professional sports. And being a sports owner, of course, you are a businessman. You want to try and take advantage of that cash flow and make as much money as you possibly can. I'm not naive to that. I understand that. I'm aware that sports is a business, and I firmly believe that sports can operate as a business without negatively impacting the sport. But that's what's happening in Oakland. The business side of what John Fisher and his cronies are doing in Oakland with the A's is undermining the team, the product, the game of baseball, and all of professional sports. If owners are allowed and, quite frankly, encouraged by their own commissioners to behave the way that John Fisher behaves, which is just put bare minimum money into that product on the field, take as much revenue share as he possibly can so he's in the green as much as possible, to have these billions of dollars of assets that he inherited from his father, but not willing to use any of that to buy or to pay for a new stadium, and instead is asking for ridiculous public funding for not just a ballpark in Oakland, but now for a ballpark in Las Vegas. Like, to allow an owner to do this, it's such an unbelievable and blatant abuse of power, and yet the MLB does nothing. And it's something that fans need to be aware of. It's something that fans need to speak out against, regardless of the team that you root for, because it is killing baseball. It is killing the sport. It is embarrassing for the sport, for the Oakland A's to have such a pathetic payroll and such a pathetic product on the field, yet have an owner that benefits from that and cashes out from that, could potentially benefit even more by getting a stadium built for him in Las Vegas, where that will increase the value of the team, rip the team out of the city of Oakland, rip the team away from diehard Oakland A's fans who, yes, are still there. Trust me, they are still there, even though the Oakland A's don't deserve for them to be there, because they don't give A's fans and haven't given A's fans for over a decade anything to really care about and be passionate about. Sure, they've had good teams. They've developed good teams through their own farm system. But what happens every single time that player's contract comes up and their payday is here? They're traded away before the Oakland A's have to pay them the money that they deserve. This has been happening for almost my entire lifetime as an Oakland A's fan. John Fisher is blatantly taking advantage of the system. He's blatantly hurting the game of baseball, hurting the MLB, hurting professional sports by putting everything business side over the sport itself, the team themselves, the fans themselves. And yet he also has the audacity to blame the fans and to blame the city of Oakland, to get the mouthpiece of baseball, Rob Manfred, to not only be willing to waive relocation fees, which is ridiculous, but on top of that, to suggest that the city of Oakland has never come to the table with a legit plan and has never tried to truly negotiate with the Oakland A's to try and paint this picture that everything that's wrong with the A's, the reason why the A's are one of the worst teams in the last decade, in the last century, is because of the fans, is because of the lack of support. Hey, look at the fact that look at the attendance tonight. Thursday night baseball, A's versus Mariners. Oh, the Oakland A's only had 2,500 fans in attendance. See, this fan base doesn't support baseball. This fan base doesn't support the A's. We need to leave and go to Las Vegas where they're sure to support us there. It's Oakland's fault. It's BS. It's nonsense. And every fan of not just baseball teams, every fan of professional sports needs to realize how a fan base and a city is being held hostage by a billionaire who does not want to play ball, who has not negotiated in good faith, who is a snake and straight up a bad person. It's not just that he is a bad owner. John Fisher is a bad human being. You want a latest example? I covered the reverse boycott that the Oakland A's did like a month ago. I was there for ABC 10 covering the reverse boycott. It was an awesome atmosphere, awesome moment. A's fans, they didn't sell out the stadium, but certainly the biggest crowd that they've had in that stadium this season. They rally, they come together to send a message, not to Fisher, because Fisher knows what the message is, and Fisher doesn't care. Dave Kaval, A's president, he knows what the message is. He doesn't care. They just blatantly ignore it. They're sending a message not just to Major League Baseball, not just to baseball owners, sending message to the rest of the world, sending messages to all of baseball. And you're damn right, sending a message to Las Vegas of, we're here. We've supported this organization even though they didn't deserve our support. And they've treated us like crap. How do you think they're going to treat you? So the A's are now planning, fans, which, by the way, this reverse boycott was completely fan-run. Of course, the organization is not going to run something like this. The reverse boycott was a complete success, so now they want to do a second one, a second reverse boycott, another opportunity to not just send a message, but also to come together and celebrate being fans, because you don't know how much longer it's going to last. The A's are already a foot and a half out the door in Oakland. They got a lot to figure out in Las Vegas, and the fight certainly isn't over. I'm not giving up, and A's fans shouldn't give up. But it feels like time is coming to an end, right, for a historic franchise that has had a lot of success in Oakland. So the second reverse boycott is happening. And what does John Fisher and the Oakland A's greedy organization do? Their average get-in-the-door price for A's games this season is $10. The ticket for that second reverse boycott, the get-in-the-door price is $44. Matt, he's a businessman. He owns the team. It's in his right to do that. It's smart business to know that more people are going to show up and supply and demand, so you're going to raise ticket prices. Don't give him the satisfaction of calling him a smart businessman. Don't give him the satisfaction of pretending that this is a savvy move on his part. This is a blatant move to pinch every penny he can out of a fan base that is just trying to show that they do support this team and they don't want to lose the team that they love. Sports is more than just a game for a lot of people, and you as Sacramento Kings fans know and understand this. We all went through this relocation together, and I guarantee you, as much as you don't like the Maloofs were a million times better and are a million times better than John Fisher and his cronies with the A's. 1,000,000 times better. The Maloofs ran out of money. They had to sell because they had no other option. Now, they didn't have to go about the way that they did it, and they certainly didn't do Sacramento any favors and deserve a lot of the hatred and vitriol they get from Oakland or Sacramento Kings fans. But John Fisher has the money. John Fisher has the assets to be able to succeed, to be able to build this new stadium in an Oakland market that is not a small market, even though he's always operated this team like they are a small market. The money's there for Fisher. He's just blatantly choosing not to because he's a cheap. That's the reality of the situation when it comes to John Fisher. So the Maloof comparison to John Fisher is not even close. Not even close. Maloofs are way better. But on top of that, as Sacramento Kings fans, you should understand the connection that we have with our sports franchises. And for a fan base like A's fans to be rallying and doing everything they can to show the MLB that they're here, the same way the Sacramento Kings fan base drew the attention of the rest of the league, got David Stern on their side, and ultimately kept their team. That's what A's fans are trying to do. And they're being painted out and made out to be the bad guys. And now, while they're still trying to prove that they're not, while they're still trying to prove that they will continue to support baseball in Oakland like they always have, despite attendance numbers, you have an owner that is blatantly taking advantage of that and now trying to pinch every penny he can out of those fans. Shame on him. He's disgusting. It's bad for all of professional sports. Certainly it's bad for the MLB. The fact that they do nothing is disgusting as well. And as an A's fan, not only am I furious for what I've been subjected to over the last, basically my entire life, I'm furious that A's fans that are more diehard and dedicated than I am. I used to go to like 15, 20 games a year. I've been to 1 or 2 games over the last handful of seasons because I don't want to support Fisher. I don't want to support that ownership. But there are people that still want to go every single day because despite how much ownership has treated them like crap, they still love that team. They love green and gold. They love being green collar. They love baseball. And they don't know how much time they have left. Those people deserve our support. Those people deserve your support. Those people deserve the support of fan bases around the league, regardless of what team you root for. And as Sacramento Kings fans, you know what this process is like. You know how hard this is. I encourage you and ask you, please rally behind A's fans as much as you possibly can because they deserve it. They deserve a good team. They deserve to have baseball stay in their city. And they certainly deserve better ownership than John Fisher.
So there you go. Matt from his car ranting about the Oakland A's and ownership. A bit of a curveball, continuing with the baseball analogies. A bit of a curveball here at the end of this podcast, but I hope you made it all the way through. I hope that you listened to that, and I hope you enjoyed this show. If you want to react to anything that I said about Fisher, if you're an Oakland A's fan that feels the same way, if you're a baseball fan and just want to weigh in, hey, let's talk about it. Of course, I encourage you again to just lend your support towards A's fans and as a sports fan, just, if nothing else, make your voice heard that this kind of ownership in professional sports should not and will not be tolerated. If nothing else, you doing that is more than enough for me. So I appreciate your support with that. Of course, I appreciate your support here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Share your thoughts on Kevin Huerter again. And I have more episodes coming for you, more interviews coming, guests coming, things like that. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Appreciate you waiting till either the next morning or staying up late to listen to this podcast. Sorry I got it out so late tonight, but I get them out when I can. So I'm happy to keep this offseason going. We're almost in August, which is the worst month of the year for the NBA, but that means we're just one step closer to the regular season being back. Of course, we will get you through that worst month and more right here on Locked On Kings. So stick with us. You have been listening to the Locked On Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.